The clanking and the stomping. Every moment, every step forward lacked subtlety and finesse. The sounds grated on Coraxis from when no one was around to distract from whatever verbal irrelevancies they wanted to tangent about. To some, his lack of concern or care could be misconstrued as rude, but he knew better. He was a member of the 8th Legion. Some of the things he was told by other legionaries, what they did on raids, their activities on the barrels of the ship the Thunderchild onto unsuspecting mortals in darkened alleyways, were best left unheard. The only time to tune in to their ramblings were on keywords or phrases, just in case there were relevancies towards a wider plan. He was getting better at walking. When pressed, he can crawl stealthily across the walls and rooftops and walk without a sound, but that took effort. At least he could walk in a straight line now, even wielding his power maul. It wasn't his first choice of weapon, but the chain glaive was a weapon that required finesse which he had now lost. He remembers when he was first interred in this new form, the pain receptors recalibrating and the shock of coming back into consciousness. The great plan that bastard arch-heretic Zephyron had for him, and relearning the basics necessarily needed to live within this perverted body. A moment of lamentation during the siege of Pythora entered his mind, how he had it all. How he was in command of the Thunderchild, how his campaign of terror was near perfect, sowing the shrine world into discord and disarray and screams from its populace. How the Order of the Argent Shroud was on its knees from both his company, the rebellious populace, and how he was in the moment about to take their canoness's head, only to be intercepted by those cursed loyalists, wreathed in flame appearing from thin air, and in that moment of distraction was cut low by that bitch. It still felt like yesterday, but he knew many decades had passed since then, centuries even. Though time was always in flux when traversing the warp, he cared little for it after the siege. There was the re-arrival of Venix and the root of Nox, and how his force was rotting within from its influence because he turned a blind eye to those spreading its word, and how it corrupted the captain of the 42nd Company into madness. There was the Amata Crusade, and now this. He was headed to the latest meeting organised by the new commander of the Thunderchild, the warband rechristened yet again to the Nox Mortis. A superfluous yet blunt title to those who could translate the language, which was perfectly Nostraman. The chosen of Nox only went by his self-appointed title, the Jaeger. It was a growing commander. It was good at taking heads, but his command was just as loose as the others. Though he had cemented a tight grip on structure and regiment, his inner conflict for combat and slaying commanders at times outweighed the greater strategy, in which then sowed confusion for the rest of his force on the battlefield. If it wasn't for himself, the Jaeger would have lost far too much of the warband a long time ago. As he walked through the hallway towards the bridge, he contemplated the screaming sculptures between every decorated arch in the walls, only parted in between by braziers emitting a blue flame. Each sculpture a canvas of flesh of various victims contorted to resemble their own last agonised scream before death in an abstract form. Some limbs were contorted far out of proportion, their waists twisted and their faces stretched far and wide to resemble a whirlwind, whilst others were posed as though they were praying upwards for a last act of mercy, with their skins stretched far upwards as wide as it could possibly be by meat hooks. The doors opened and Coraxis was greeted by a large round table on a balcony showing green hazy hollow picts of the siege of Hive Primus. On the lowered balcony, the mortal residents of the Thunderchild were all racing around from deck to deck, relaying information and performing the usual maintenance rites on the ship. Around the table stood the Nox Mortis Chiroptera, if it could even be called that. These merciless marauders were all gathered to discuss the recent outcome of the siege, all turning their heads to him with silence. Coraxis looked around to see if there were any changes to the ship. subtle nods that could suspect betrayal around the corner of his eye. They were all there, surrounded by Gothic architecture, dim blue braziers emitting a soft glow around the deck, with the wide open windows above showing the cold void of space, only parted by a decoration of chains with hanging flayed bodies and limbs dangling, with the promise of falling onto the crew below as the decay set in. From the left of the table was the degenerate Krugar, the Midnight Slasher. On the night of his sundering from the spectres of flame, they had also wreaked a bloody vengeance on him too, one grabbing him by the throat and boiling his skin. Where once there was a pale Nostraman skin was now seared and burned flesh. Occasionally you could catch him drooling if he wasn't concentrating on making an appearance, even with that ridiculous hat. Next to him was the Butcher of the Crystal Lake, Voorhes, a great slaughterer and one of the best to make an example of the enemy or their own should one get too ambitious for the throne of the warband. He was a monster of few words, so he preferred his actions to show his true intent. Next was the arch-heretic Zephron, standing a head taller than other Astartes, buried in mechatendrils in a black cloak resembling the icon of the Reaper from Nostraman and ancient Terran traditions, holding his omniscient scythe axe, displaying the icon of the true Mechanicum. Some wondered how much of man was lost within that host of metal and silicone. Although he gave himself the title the Master of Puppets, it has often been rumoured that the reason why is because he looked like a puppet himself, each mechatendril resembling a string on a body long lost within that labyrinthine mass. Every time Coraxis saw him, he twitched from the corner of his right eye. It was a matter of convenience that his helmet was welded shut onto his armoured body. He would never want to give that ghoul the satisfaction of an involuntarily bodily movement. After that was the tormentor Navier Cravor, the warband surgeon wearing Chayurgan proudly over his cloaked power armour, with his scythe held tightly in his left hand, looking at his vambrace, taking in additional information of the wounded and near dead from the siege. Lastly, the Sandman stood next to him on the right of the table. The Sandman was the warband sorcerer who held the clearest link with Nox. If he only knew sooner how much of a threat Nox would be to his vision of Legion unification, it was another shortcoming he'd regret and lament again later. As he took his place around the others at the table, he turned his head far left behind Krugar. There was a small staircase that led to a throne. The throne held two severed heads underneath, each arm in separate arches which patterned around the throne symmetrically. Each arch had a severed head within. All the heads were moving, opening and closing their mouths as though they were still trying to scream. Whether it was for help or for a merciful death, he cared not. Sitting upon the throne was the now new leader of the Nox Mortis, the Jaeger. His body was just as foul as Coraxis's, but for the opposite reason. Where his was of steel and flesh, the Jaeger's was of demonic bonds. From where the joints of power armour existed, shadows emitted like condensation steaming from each joint. His helmet adorned in the bat wings of the 8th Legion, the lenses glowing a harsh red. One hand was a power-armoured gauntlet, whilst the other was an ornate lightning claw emitting sparks of electricity, showing flashes of how fused he was with his warplate and the corruption bestowed upon him by that warp entity. Silence reigned still as he stood with the others.
So, we lost.
Krugar disrupted the silence.
Shut it!
The Jaeger growled, clearly not amused at Krugar's attempts of opening the discussion.
Well, it's one way to break the ice from the dull drab of such stoic honour I see around me. I could be chasing children who wandered astray from the parents at the bows of the ship, but instead I'm stood here looking at pictures that give me no cause of care, with little context from what we've all been thinking.
Kruger had a way of saying things that could get under the skin of even the most stalwart.
Let's get straight to the point.
Coraxis began, preempting what could be a titillating back and forth that could escalate to full conflict.
We underestimated the strength in our allies.
He hadn't had the time to fully analyse the analytics that the table read like the others, but he knew it was a good start and a de-escalation from the previous opening. That, and he had his experience to make a good wager of what happened since he made the order to hold the raptor packs and what was left of the war crypts back, instead of losing too much into a kill box or no man's land when the siege was in motion.
It appears the strength of the Baron's armies were over-exaggerated. His artillery and aircraft fulfilled the roles, but we required more.
Zephron tapped his scythe-like omniscient axe and the Picts transitioned to the three main Picts, one showing the scale of the governor's armies, another showing the anti-air, and lastly the Picts showing the aggression of the defenders.
The aggression targeted towards our lines was met with anticipation as though they were expecting us. The wolf strike was a terminal blow to our support. They were improperly deployed with 2 relics lost is a costly affair.
His tone was just as mechanical as you'd expect. The rasp, the irritation in his throat was the only reminder that there was something once human in that form, that somewhere within the bionics and mechatendrils housed a human brain, as uneasy as the thought intruded upon Coraxis' mind.
We need time to recoup and maintenance. Their machine spirits need time to be retamed, and the shells will take many cycles to repair.
The Jaeger's claw tightened around his arm above the throne, his talons digging into the arm. The head below was staring at the digits that barely hung above his head.
They knew we were a priority threat and we had never met this company. Someone's notified them of our arrival.
The Jaeger growled again. Voorhees stepped in, pressing the wolf's head to enlarge on the table.
It will have been the spirit wolves.
All turned to Voorhees. He was known as a man of few words, so it always came as a surprise when he voiced his thoughts.
They've been chasing our tail since the days when we were Necropolis. They know our patterns by now, but must have been too far away, so sent an emergency telepath message relayed for rapid response.
Coraxis nodded. The Night Lords were no sons of Alfarius, but no one escapes espionage from this pack. There are no double agents within the ship, for madness would have claimed them long before they would. The Jaeger loosened his grip on the throne and nodded too.
My honored Strigoi have taken casualties during this campaign. My stock will need replenishing.
His tone was more aggressive than assertive. It was clear to all to tread lightly where they spoke. The Jaeger was in no mood for rebuttals after those events.
The Avatar is in the vault temperament presently.
The Sandman spoke. His tone was more of a hiss than words. He wore a simple helmet, just a clean sheet of metal that looked as though it was welded onto his skull. No features, no ceremony wore. The only visible piece on his face was his mouth, and those features were ghoulish, as though his skin had shriveled up and became gaunt, with his skin grey and his lips purple. His teeth sharpened as though they were all fangs. He was an individual that wore what was necessary but lacked panache. He wore scrolls and a bastardized psychic hood and a jump pack among his mismatched armour with Nostraman runes engraved on every plate, but that was as close as anything to ceremony as it would get. All the Chiroptera knew the Jaeger also had a direct connection with Nox, which explained his irate behaviour emulating the warp entity's frustration. Being his chosen, the first of the Strigoi who embraced his corruption, his mood often reflected what the parasite that entrapped the warband was thinking or feeling. That, and the fact he was still recovering from the wound the rune priest punctured into his chest from the runic spear he bore. Coraxis remembers well that this was the one who took Venix's carcass and dragged it back to the ship for it to be corrupted, twisted, pulped and sifted by a fragment of its power into the creature in the lowest decks known as the Avatar of Nox.
I have been communing with our Dark Master. He is enraged that he could not usurp the power that was promised, but I have presented further opportunity to him. Power we conceals.
Our Dark Master. Those words sent an unnerving chill down Coraxis. The idea that the warband could be owned by this wretched warp entity made him feel outright disgust. Although he wanted to speak out in open opposition, he knew better and bit back. There would come a day where the warband would be free of this curse, just like how he liberated the warband and took command from its previous master. But for now, this entity held power too great to rebel against. The Sandman continued.
I have promised our Dark Master the steps to his ascendancy in exchange for time. We know the losses have been great, but among the Imperium there is great opportunity, as the Inquisitor our Lord captured has unveiled many secrets as we peel his mind layer by layer.
His gauntlet taps the holopict, changing it to the now Governor of Thanatos. With a face of fear, now a flicker of lightning erupted, and the Jaeger with his pack of raptors appeared from the darkest shadows.
Their Governor has now seen an aspect of our Dark Master, and gave us a glimmer of dread once the Chosen had picked his prey. That was all that was needed to establish a link. The prey is a coward at heart and weak-willed, which is the perfect pickings for ourselves to play with.
He points at Krugar.
We will enact the rituals of dream haunting, and while we build our strength, you will haunt his dreams 1,000 times.
Krugar gave a sly smile. One of the warband's favourite ways of infiltration was what many called dream haunting. An ancient gift parted from Nox to the warband. The concept was simple. Through rituals generating its power, you could manifest in your prey's dreams and inflict uncountable horrors within them. It was a fragile process. One wrong syllable and it could mean the souls, the hosts of the ritual could be rent apart, but it was a risk Krugar wholly embraced because he considered it his art form. From the very first time Krugar dream haunted, he was hooked like a slave on narcotics. To him, it was the greatest gift he ever received. The Sandman continued.
This is also the opportunity for the populace. After their governor's actions in the Underhive, populace morale is low.
The Sandman took out from a bag on his belt, grabbed a handful of Prosperan ash and spread it over the table.
I sense their tension, worry and fear. It is something for our midnight slasher to carve a reputation on a planetary scale. Due to the rites of initiation, before we were interrupted by the Mortian 50th Rifles, we cemented the seeds of a monster in the dark. An ancient fear that not even the light or guns of the Imperium could extinguish, for not even they cannot outright kill ideas. It will invite superstition to which our Dark Master can slowly but steadily draw power, form to emit his will.
The sand began to float and form into a vortex with the faces of people in despair around the picts of the governor. Coraxis turned to the Sandman.
A fine and notable plan, but this planet has the Inquisition in its roots and veins. Surely they will be bringing more ecclesiarchy priests to the system to replenish morale and repel the Dreamons. If we add 2 plus A around the matter and draw upon the eye and ire of those bastards, what then?
The Jaeger stood from his throne, all turned to attention. The shadows he was emitting around his back started channeling and forming into the shape of a jump pack and massive bat-like wings protruding from it.
I will begin negotiations with the Sons of Alphias. It will be a simple trade. In exchange for them to destabilize, delay, and espionage to take away attention from ourselves, they can take whatever information they desire from the Inquisitors they capture. My lord, one does not make a simple negotiation with the Sons of Alphias. What if they desire more than the knowledge of our esteemed Nox? We can lend them a sliver of ammunition and mechanical knowledge. They are not sons of Prospero, my midnight messiah. Knowledge has a use, but they are not inquisitive enough to overreach. They know their limits. I will not be denied my prize. I will take the governor's head, and I will display his screams across the planet, and I will submit the Nox Mortis as a warband both our Legion and the Imperium will forever remember. Like you did at the siege, throwing our claws out like a son of the fourth, triumph brought with too much blood is no triumph at all. You mistake me, Coraxis. You believe I didn't read the Thanatos path that you cling so vehemently to. I am not the rest of my esteemed table here. I do plan for greater. I plan for far and wide to be remembered, and I plan on putting us in the annals of unforgettable history. And you have yet to live those words. You may be old, but your command is young. You have much to learn. I saved your reputation during the siege, but only just. Never overcommit using our brothers to feed your ego. Ego. Is that what you think this is about? No. This is about sending a message to the Imperium from the smallest of children to the highest of inbred aristocrats those lapdogs have yet to offer. That we are the 8th Legion. We command with absolute authority. We are the ones they should be bowing to. We are the monsters who take them when they are sleeping. We are the ones who make the screaming start at night. We are the ones who send the message to be forever afraid so they learn their place. We are the Night Lords of the Nox Mortis, and our vengeance against this rotting carcass of kingdom will come by my hand. I come for you for guidance, that is true, which is why you are here, but you overreach. You usurp my orders again, Coraxis, and I will take your head. Your time has come and gone, and I need not to remind you your place again.
Krugar sniggered.
Still forgotten within the old times, just like many relics in the long war.
Coraxis turned and pointed at him with his maul.
And you can shut it like you ever cared. You're nothing more than a junkie awaiting his next hit.
Krugar rolled his eyes and began tutting.
Oh, and that was meant to sear my soul? I am sorry, I forgot I wasn't talking to a fellow Astartes, just another of Zephron's toys.
Coraxis thumbed the switch on his maul. Lightning crackled across the weapon. He remembers the jabbing of metal, the whirring of machine medicare tools, and the searing pain of cutting flesh. He remembers the master of puppets haranguing his plan of using his missing body as an opportunity to see if he was the first who could make the ultimate predator. The Thalax-class automata was a craft of ingenuity of the Mechanicum. To turn the form of humanity and weaponize it to become the most pivotal of shock troops during the heresy was a feat of pride to many adepts within the true Mechanicum. Zephron wanted to go one step higher than that. He wanted to be the first to make what he designated the ultimate predator. One that could be mass-produced and rival even that of Custodes. Coraxis was the perfect candidate for this, unbeknownst to him at the time. To combine the strongest elements of both Astartes and Mechanicum with the psychology of an Astartes to combat the shortcoming of mortals from the insanity of being interred in the exosuit, it was the perfect opportunity to test to see whether it could be done. For all intents and purposes, Zephyron had confirmed he had all the major organs that makes an Astartes to keep the identity authentic and sincere to his experiment, but for all who had eyes, he was anything but. A true abomination of machine and flesh. One arm was larger than the other, for one holding the power maul was made of machine, with his hand preserved enough to be attached at the end of the arm, while the other arm was his and still preserved and somewhat attached to his new body. For all he knew, he was the first made in this way, and Coraxis hated it. He hated the fact that this one time he allowed Krugar to get to him because there was a cutting truth to his words. No legionary would follow him in his current state because they all saw him as exactly that. Some Mechanicum thrall with some wit and charisma, awaiting orders from his master like a chained dog, a servitor, a puppet. He was simply a construct within the mechanism of regimented structure and nothing more. With a loud bang from the hilt of Zephyron's omniscient scythe axe, a loud screeching cut through the air. Red glyphs appeared randomly in the air and Coraxis locked up and shut down. He couldn't move any of his limbs as they slumped down, and Mag locked him in his place on the deck as his maul powered down. The rest of the Chiroptera winced in some form, and Krugar grimaced at the sound, drooling across the corner of his charred lips. Members of the deck below screamed from the seething sound. Some crew members' ears were bleeding. It was only for a moment, but once the sound died down, some of the crew below were deaf from the instant. As the red glyphs faded from the sound, Zephyron ordered,
"This bickering is irrelevant. As much as the analysis of combat from Coraxis would be beneficial, the moment of the timing is poor."
The Jaeger moved on.
There are more pressing issues at hand among the planet. We have vague reports to polar regions, but from what could be gathered from encrypted data from the Inquisitor's mind is that something had usurped all the power in the region. But timely intervention had entrapped it and bound something, but it's something we cannot locate further details for. All we know is that it is protected by the Dark Prince to an extent. Speed is what will be crucial for the next raid, as we must act before whatever lies can be freed, so that the great Nox can usurp the power and drown the planet in its cold, eternal darkness.
The key will lie with the Governor.
The Tormentor spoke.
Looking at the after effects of the Underhive, the populace morale so low and the mild psychic latency found in various hives, it is an opportunity to retune our melody. If we can dream home to connect the populace to a singular beacon, that being the Governor, with his screams broadcast in a statement from the Legion, we can connect the psychic latency to backlash the power of Nox. Tormented souls all screaming in pure, unadulterated terror across the planet. This should give the eternal void the power it craves.
The Sandman gave a sly grin, though it looked more like a pleased grimace.
That is perfect. You really are turning into a fine student with your psychic gift.
Navir nodded.
I must take advantage of all the talents I have so I can further perfect my craft. I can picture it. The screams of millions, Nox's essence radiating and steaming from their eyes. Their screams to be the last as his will takes their air from their lungs.
The Jaeger agreed.
I feel the plan is now adjourned. This will be a long scheme guerrilla war, but when the plan reaches fruition, I can already taste its rewards.
He points at Zephyron.
Unshackle your toy. Take her back with you and prepare the rites of awakening for the great House Darkul. Next deployment, we will rely on our own strength and no one else's. We will bring the great house to the front line to let them know their end is truly done.
Zephram bows and nods. The Jaeger then points to Kruger.
You will go into a long ritual of dream haunting. Your mainstay will be of the populace. I will follow for bouts when needed by the Sandman. I will be the governor's nightmare. I will be the one he looks up to in abject horror when the time is right, and I will relish every second of it.
Kruger simply mirrors a mocking bow and grin.
Let my greatest work begin.